Hello, welcome to the February 2017 podcast of Article of the Month, a special online feature of anesthesia and analgesia and openanesthesia.org. I'm May P.N. Smith of the editorial board, and I have the privilege today of speaking with Dr. Michael Richardson, who is the first author of our featured article, Nitrous Oxide During Labor. Maternal satisfaction does not depend exclusively on analgesia effectiveness. Dr. Richardson is Associate Professor of Anesthesiology, and he's the OB Anesthesia Fellowship Director at Vanderbilt University in Nashville. He also is Director of Resident and SRNA Education. Dr. Richardson, thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I can tell you that the authors and I are delighted to have been chosen to contribute to the Article of the Month this month, so thank you for that.
That's terrific. So I wonder, for starters, if you can give us an overview of the goals, design, and conclusions of the study.
Sure. About a year or so ago, we realized we had reached the 5-year anniversary of our implementation of a nitrous oxide labor analgesia program at Vanderbilt. We knew we had a clinical and quality database of potentially relevant data. We also knew that the evidence for analgesic effectiveness and maternal satisfaction was somewhat lacking. So that prompted our examination of our own database and the discovery that we had a very large sample size. So the goal of this research project was simply to compare self-reported analgesic effectiveness scores and self-reported satisfaction scores between 3 groups of parturients who had delivered vaginally. One group was a group of women who chose neuraxial labor analgesia. The second group were women who used nitrous oxide for labor through delivery. And then the third group were women who used nitrous initially and then switched to neuraxial analgesia at some point before delivery. The design involved accessing our database containing self-reported analgesia and analgesic effectiveness and satisfaction scores captured during routine postpartum follow-up. And for the study, we included only women who ultimately delivered vaginally. We excluded those who used nitrous oxide, neuraxial, or both before ultimately delivering by cesarean. And that group numbered about 3,800. There were also about 1,100 women who delivered without any analgesia from our partner. As I said, we introduced our nitrous oxide program about 6 years ago, June 2011, and the follow-up data were available in database form through April 2014, so that represented a 34-month database or sample. These included data for 6,500 women who delivered vaginally. 19% of them initially received nitrous oxide analgesia, and the remainder, 81%, chose neuraxial analgesia from the start. Of the nitrous oxide group, 40% switched to neuraxial at some point before delivery, and 60% stayed with the nitrous as the sole modality. And our data were complete and available for over 90% of the total group. We made an a priori decision to aggregate scores into 3 categories: high, which would be scores of 8, 9, or 10, intermediate, 5, 6, or 7, and then low, 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Regarding the results, first we confirmed what long has been assumed, but not really clear from any formal study, namely that analgesic effectiveness of neuraxial modalities is significantly greater than that with nitrous oxide. 92% of the parturients using neuraxial analgesia alone or after a trial of nitrous reported high analgesic effectiveness scores. Regarding the results, 6% reported intermediate scores. In contrast, only half of the women who used nitrous oxide as the sole labor analgesic rated analgesic effectiveness as high. 27% rated it intermediate, and 21% low. So that wasn't surprising, but it was good to confirm this in a large data set. The interesting finding was that despite the heterogeneity in the analgesic effective scores among women who used nitrous oxide alone, satisfaction was uniformly high and was not different from the high scores that women reported who chose neuraxial analgesia, again, alone or after trial of nitrous. I think, May, in interpreting this, it's important to consider the context of this study. We conduct an anesthesiology consult for every pregnant woman who is admitted to L&D, during which we include discussion of nitrous oxide as a labor analgesic option, along with neuraxial analgesia, as well as options for cesarean delivery. Analgesic modalities are available upon request around the clock, and importantly, women who choose nitrous oxide may request neuraxial analgesia anytime, and this includes up until the time of delivery, as much as possible, or even afterwards in the case of perineal birth trauma. Importantly, the subjects of the study were placed into 3 groups according to their decisions, and this includes women in the nitrous group who reported low analgesic scores. That is, women who did not switch to neuraxial analgesia despite low analgesic effectiveness. Women who did switch, most often due to inadequate analgesia or sometimes from unacceptable side effects, wound up self-selecting themselves into the nitrous neuraxial group. In the end, this study has convinced us that nitrous oxide does serve the needs and preferences of a minority subset of parturients at our institution, most of whom report high satisfaction with the modality. Findings also challenge assumptions that there might be out there that labor analgesia is simply about complete alleviation of labor pain. There are clearly other aspects of labor analgesia that are of importance to laboring women. In any case, nitrous oxide holds an important place in our practice.
Dr. Richardson, I think that's really wonderful that, in part because this was a retrospective analysis, you allowed the patients to make the choices that they wanted for labor analgesia. And so I wonder, do you think there were any differences between parturients who made different choices at baseline? That is, were the patients who chose nitrous oxide different somehow from those who didn't?
So, May, I think that's a great question, and it's an important point to emphasize. I think absolutely there are fundamental differences between these groups simply because they chose nitrous oxide and not neuraxial analgesia. The reasons for that choice are countless, really based on each unique individual's beliefs, values, preferences, and lived experiences. Like many places, our population is highly heterogeneous. There's low risk and high risk. There's variation in parity. There's spontaneous labor. There's oxytocin induction or augmentation. There are complicated pregnancies, either obstetrically, maternal, fetal complications. Birth plans range from strong intentions for epidural, strong intentions for nitrous, strong intentions for natural or unmedicated birth. Some women are flexible, open, or undecided. And there are some women who haven't given the birth process a single thought until they arrive in labor. We have socioeconomic heterogeneity. There's cultural diversity. About 20% of our patients have limited English proficiency, and their first language or language they speak at home is not English, which is a surrogate for some of the cultural diversity. Many are immigrants. There are women who have had unique, very good or bad experiences with prior labor. We have a number of different obstetric providers. We have OB generalists who are parts of practices who see patients. There's also resident/OB generalist service. There are maternal fetal medicine physicians. We also have 2 private midwifery groups. We have some women who come to labor and delivery with their own hired doulas. We have just the full range of emotional and psychological makeup. So that's a long list of various ways that a pregnant and laboring population is heterogeneous. And I think that therein lie some of the reasons that underlie each unique individual's choice around their labor analgesia. So, like all quantitative studies, what we report in this particular study are numbers and averages, categories, statistics, but these averages don't reveal this heterogeneity that is quite vast and the many outliers. And so for us, this study was a great beginning to begin to explore some of the complexity of decision-making and reflecting on satisfaction, which I think will certainly require much more than quantitative methods as we go forward.
That's very interesting, and actually I remember that you mentioned in your discussion in the paper that patient satisfaction may relate more to how their pre-existing expectations were met rather than their actual degree of analgesia. And you have just listed a long list of ways in which your patients were quite heterogeneous. In particular, I'm wondering if you separated out nulliparous women from multiparous women, or do you know if having experienced labor in the past or other types of labor analgesia in the past had any effect on their expectations?
Well, absolutely. I think that's true. Unfortunately, being a retrospective study of a database that was not really created for the purpose of research or for testing specific hypotheses, we weren't able to explore that to, let's say, to control for parity or to control for prior labor or prior experiences or prior labor analgesic modalities. Also, had we done so and found one of these factors did associate with satisfaction, we still wouldn't necessarily know why. But I think both you and I and many obstetric anesthesiologists are aware of the impact of nulliparity versus multiparity, let's say, on the duration of labor on average, not as a rule. And so many times a multiparous woman will, I often ask women about their prior experience with labor analgesia, and I can tell that it is having an effect on their choices as we go forward during this labor. Again, I think the answers to these will require some alternative methods, some of which we're currently working on, and kind of a broad look at not just parity and prior analgesic experiences or labor experiences, but some of the factors that I mentioned a few minutes ago.
So in this study, you looked at data from women who chose various types of analgesia. And I wonder if you have any theories, or maybe you have some data collecting now about what patient satisfaction might be like from parturients who choose natural childbirth.
Well, we definitely have a proportion of women who come to our maternal care unit intending on natural childbirth, natural in quotes, right? So I think that term I consider to include some variation, but typically it's an intention for a minimally medicated or perhaps an unmedicated birth, and the level of commitment to that birth plan ranges from mild and flexible to very strong and very determined. And I think that the natural childbirth plan sometimes includes a very strong desire not to receive neuraxial analgesia for any of a number of reasons. We actually are just now completing a qualitative study of the clarifying comments that accompanied these analgesia and satisfaction scores. The manuscript preparation is now complete, so stay tuned. And I won't go into this particular study at this time, but I will share kind of a very interesting finding, which was that we did see more than one comment that sounded something like, "I could not have achieved natural childbirth without nitrous!" Exclamation point. And I must say that the satisfaction level among such parturients is not uncommonly fairly stellar, as I alluded to by the exclamation point. In fact, we do have plenty of women whose initial plan is natural who end up using nitrous oxide. There are women who intend natural who go right to neuraxial or nitrous to neuraxial. And we are interested in what those proportions might be, or how big a factor that intention plays in a woman's course through labor and their decision making. I think that birth plans that involve limited or non-medicated birth or avoidance of epidural analgesia, I think those birth plans reflect values or preferences that are very personal, that are very likely varied and individual in the rationale or the reasons. And I think that a level of commitment to that plan may be a significant factor in what ultimately happens. But I think the decision-making process is probably much more complex than that. But I'm quite sure that it's a factor. And I want to just mention that to bear in mind that roughly 20% of our laboring parturients here choose nitrous oxide, and that's been consistent for the 6 or so years that we've offered nitrous oxide. That really, remarkably, that has not really changed at all over about 6 years.
Well, we'll look forward to that next paper. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about how your department decided to offer nitrous as a labor analgesic in the first place.
Well, interestingly, as I mentioned earlier, we have the presence of two private practice midwifery groups here at Vanderbilt. We also have there are School of Medicine midwifery staff who collaborate and are part of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. And developing and implementing this program was our department's response to a request that we do so. And it did come from one of the midwifery groups here. Dr. Basinger, one of the co-authors, was division chief at the time, and he brought the request to our division. I remember the meeting, and we discussed and debated it, and we looked into it, and we concluded with a commitment to develop the program. One of our colleagues, Dr. Sarah Starr, who's not with us now, but she really championed the implementation of the program, including much of the research and planning and logistics and some of the protocol development. And so we launched it. And little did we know that it would lead to kind of a long-lasting program as well as some great opportunities for research as well.
So for listeners who may be inspired by your experience and who may be considering this offering, can you tell us about how you obtain informed consent? Do you see anything different as a result of this study?
I'll answer the last portion of that question first. I don't think our study revealed anything that would alter the way we would discuss and present nitrous oxide with its benefits and risks. Really, as I mentioned earlier, we do go through an informed consent process with all women when they arrive on the unit, and we try to do that at a time when the pain of labor has not escalated to the point where consent is quite difficult to obtain, or informing becomes clouded or difficult. Like I said before, we go through all the different offerings that we have for various scenarios, including what we would do in the event of a stat cesarean section if the patient did not have pre-existing neuraxial analgesia. So we actually use a consent form, one side of which discusses neuraxial and general anesthesia, and then we have conveniently placed our consent for administration of nitrous oxide for labor on the reverse side of that consent form. So we go through a brief description of nitrous oxide, including some of the side effects, and we go through that with each patient.
Okay. Well, the FDA has recently come out with warnings about the effect of systemic anesthetics on mothers with fetuses in utero and also on pediatric patients. And all around the country, we anesthesiologists are trying to help our patients understand what the implications of these warnings are. This obviously was not much of a concern with neuraxial anesthesia, but I wonder how you may be counseling patients about potential effects of nitrous oxide.
Well, that's a great question, and I think it's one that's in evolution. On the other hand, not to diminish the weight of an FDA warning, certainly. But regarding the warning, it's our understanding that not much has changed except the statement or the warning. In other words, the evidence that that statement or position is based on haven't really changed. And in fact, in reviewing our consent form, long before this FDA warning, importantly, we've included in writing the fact that nitrous oxide has been used throughout the world for labor pain control. And this is a quote: "Nitrous oxide has been used throughout the world for labor pain control for many decades and is considered safe. However, some animal studies have shown effects on animal babies, and it is not known if in the future there may be proven some negative effect on human babies." And so he goes on to say, "I understand there could be theoretical risks to this as well as most other pain-relieving medications used during pregnancy. We have not discussed whether or not we should incorporate language that refers specifically to the FDA warning or not. That's something we'll be considering. But I think the uncertainty regarding the effects of anesthetics on human and fetuses and pediatric patients is still pretty significant, and I think it's an evolution.
Okay. Well, certainly it's a difficult challenge since all of these considerations are very hypothetical and theoretical. In contrast, Can you share with us the nuts and bolts of how you oversee the administration of nitrous, monitor patient vital signs, and even bill for anesthesia services?
Sure. Briefly, we really a three-part. We assess the parturient, including identifying contraindications, the full discussion of benefits, limitations, side effects, and then secondly, we prepare for administration. It's important that the equipment be inspected and carefully and proper function be confirmed. We've had occasions where the apparatus has not functioned correctly or usually because of user error. So we need to make sure that nitrous oxide tanks are full. We need to make sure that oxygen flow rates are very high. We directly connect to the oxygen source in the room. There's also important instruction that the patient needs to use regarding using the apparatus, including the way to hold to the face of the mask, making sure that the seal is maintained even during exhalation to ensure evacuation of nitrous oxide from the room, to minimize a bystander or nursing personnel exposure, timing strategies, and then finally, thirdly, we monitor the use, especially initially, ensuring proper use, assessing and recording vital signs, assessing effectiveness and satisfaction and side effects. And in the event that the patient is not experiencing adequate relief, just making sure that it's not due to some problem with the way she's using it or timing or even apparatus issues. And ultimately, if she's not experiencing adequate analgesia, then reminding her that she is welcome to alternatives if she so chooses. Thereafter, it's a matter of checking in on the patient intermittently. And you also mentioned billing. We use a generic sedation code, which includes a small unit load, and then time until a cap. And this varies with insurance providers. If she converts to a neuraxial block, then a neuraxial analgesia load is charged, and then lose time from the initial analgesia. I'm not an expert on this, but I understand that reimbursement varies depending on insurance carrier. And another question that occasionally we are asked is, has the introduction of nitrous oxide affected our neuraxial analgesia rate? And although we don't have very solid, inconclusive proof, we're fairly certain that it really hasn't changed our neuraxial rate too much. And I would say that women who are committed to unmedicated birth, who otherwise would not use our services, often find nitrous oxide acceptable. And then a reminder that there is a substantial rate of conversion to labor, neuraxial analgesia, as I mentioned earlier, and is noted in the study. Of women who start with nitrous who ultimately deliver by cesarean, there's about I think a 62% conversion to neuraxial, and that's compared to the 40% conversion to neuraxial among women who ultimately deliver vaginally. Anyway, that's kind of some of the nuts and bolts regarding logistics and whatnot. For those who are interested, Drs. Lopez and Basinger and I have a review article coming out in the March 2017 issue of Anesthesiology Clinics of North America, which includes a great deal, in addition to effectiveness, satisfaction, side effect, and historical information. It includes a great deal of practical information, including health and safety risks, environmental concerns, equipment, as well as the administrative procedures and clinical use issues. And then I want to also mention that my email address is at the bottom of the first page of the A&A article, and we would certainly welcome inquiries for any of those who are interested in asking specific questions.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Richardson, for not only talking about the article, but offering your experience and also these other references. It's so wonderful. And as I'm listening to you, I'm reminded that even when analgesia is not perfect, there's so much we can do as anesthesiologists to help ensure a positive patient experience for our parturients.
Very true, May. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss the article.
Thank you.